The Strutfit Show, bringing retail into the future.
Hello and welcome to the Strutfit Show. I'm your host, Ang Nair. I'm also the CEO of Strutfit, where our vision is the same as the vision for this show, to bring retail into the future. Every episode, I'll be joined by a guest who is leading or innovating in some part of the retail spectrum, from design to manufacturing to marketing and even to sales. We'll discuss trends, learnings, and ideas and really try to figure out what the top performers in your field are doing. Along the way, we'll discover some lessons you can apply to your own career and hopefully even have some fun. All right, let's do it.
Hey, Sarah, welcome to the Strutfit Show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi.
My pleasure. So the reason we started this show many years ago now was we found there was cool innovation happening in the retail space, but it was very disparate. Like there'd be cool things happening in size and fit, for example, or marketing or manufacturing, but those silos were never really talking to each other. And so we thought, all right, let's become this bridge and be a place where people can have these discussions and learn. You know, if you're in marketing, maybe you learn about what laughs are. Maybe that'll actually help marketing somehow. And so, yeah, here we are. I think your episode number maybe 15. We've had a lot of cool guests on, and yeah, super excited. I mean, sizing. So this podcast is more generally about sort of retail and innovation, but Strutfit as a company is solving sizing. So how exciting to have someone who's worked in the same space as us for so long.
Likewise, and I think you're totally right about the silos and then connecting the dots between, and that's been my journey. So I'm happy to share what I've learned and my experience. And then, I mean, again, thank you for the opportunity. It's great to have you out there doing this for everybody, for the industry and the community. So awesome.
Awesome.
Let's get started.
All right. Well, yeah, let's get started. Well, you were at Nike for, I say, a long time. Yeah. Maybe let's start with, how did you end up there, and what was your evolution, and how did you end up being the global digital size and fit director?
Yeah, so I started at Nike in 2011, and actually it was in localization. At the time, Nike had a division called Digital Sports, which was basically creating wearables and mobile apps for activity. So it had Nike running, it had different experiences in mobile applications for basketball and training. Some of them had sensors embedded into shoes that would track your movements and then tell you how you were performing. It had FuelBand, which was this wearable bracelet essentially that was giving you the counting steps and many other things. And they needed to go to market. That was in preparation for the 2012 Olympics. So they needed to localize the experience. And I had a background in localization, having worked at Microsoft in Dublin, Ireland. And I moved at the end of 2010 to San Diego in California. So I applied for a very generic position. There was actually a digital producer, and then they called me 3 months later. So never lose hope, for a localization position. And that started a journey with that division. It was basically a startup within Nike that was solely devoted on these innovative experiences and really engaging consumers through activity. And so that is where I quickly realized that it wasn't just a producer role in localization. We actually were at the beginning of a journey within digital that then led to Nike really investing in-house and bringing in expertise in product management, in engineering, and building a whole division around it, and a very successful one. And then also the e-commerce side of it. So my journey started there, localizing apps and building platforms for localization. So I had started to basically tinker with the stuff that I didn't know, but I had to be curious about it and talk about innovation. At the time, in the industry, we were managing web and mobile. And mobile with Android and iOS. And we were struggling with the fact that we couldn't find a tool that would allow us to localize a single string once. We were basically sending the same thing 3 times from the different platforms. And we were like, no, we need to come up with something better. And so we built a POC in-house, and then we started localizing stuff in that way. And then we basically architected it internally. And then it was done in a way that was using cloud technology. This was 20 13, 14. So we were kind of, oh, look at us. We're like all innovative in this space, but we were trying to leapfrog the technology that existed at the time and try to be more forward looking. And that kind of helped us in the long run. So did that, built essentially the function, the platform, then it scaled to serve the bigger e-commerce site and everything really that Nike was producing. So when at some point in 2016, I think there were different shuffling of reorganizations. At the time, we were always moving as one unit of globalization, kind of kept as an incubator and moved around. But then at some point, we ended up in operations for e-commerce. And that's when my then manager came to me and said, hey, Europe has some problems with sizing. They said that there's some problems in it's not exactly globalization or localization, but it's kind of adjacent to that. Can you give it a look? And I was like, sure. And maybe I shared this with you before, but it's like I had 5 problems, and I thought genuinely that within 5 weeks I was going to be done with them,
Oh my
so
God.
I named them deck. The deck had like a couple of pages about each of the problems they were having, and I renamed each problem after Spice Girl. So I had scary, posh. I kid you not, this is how I approached it. I was like, okay, this week we're about posh, and it started this journey, which meant that from my end, which had been like I've been looking at how to communicate to consumers, making things pretty, making things intelligible. Now suddenly I had to deal with sizing, which seemed to be like a very small thing. And but I knew nothing about. I mean, I knew my experience, and coming from Europe, from Italy, and then having lived in Ireland, I experimented going from the Italian system, the broader European system, the UK system, and then the US system. So they thought, you kind of understand it. And I started talking to footwear engineers last, engineering in particular, and then tech developers in apparel. Because I was like, well, we need a size conversion, or people are telling us that something doesn't make sense. What do I do? What do I need to do? And that is where it became like pretty clear pretty soon that the problem was a little bit bigger than my 5 weeks like estimate, and that it was a lot to do with standards and how the industry decided that basically any brand could do whatever they wanted, and then
Yup.
kind of it's like, yeah, we share the same alphabet. It's like saying at some point I was like, it's like a language that in theory is the same as a language, but it's different. And it's like, or currency. I was like, it's like currency, but it doesn't translate. It's like you don't have, I don't know, an institution or some place where the conversion is predetermined and everybody respects it for whatever the time frame is. It's like, oh, this standard is here and it's adopted by this brand in this way and this other brand in this way. And then again, peeling the onion, you find out that even when you want standardization and you try to get design and all the development of the product aligned so that you create consistency, there's other elements that come beside the fact that there is a lot of variation there, and and you can't standardize. You can only standardize until a certain point. And then the thing is, you have manufacturing and many other variables come into play at that point. So the end result is that you may have thousands of products or even fewer products, but in general that don't fit the same. And then again, the size conversions and how they translate from one system to another. And so I had to start studying the subject. And I remember at the time I was still leading globalization, but I had this other thing on the side, which was size and fit. And gradually it went from a 20% of my time into, no, this is 50%, and now it's 70, and now it's like 100. And they were like, okay, you can detach from globalization, go after this. I was reluctant because I had my team, I'm living the life. And now I had this chaos. But honestly, it was fun because I learned so many other new things. And I felt also that I was learning about what Nike was because it's the core product. So you learn about apparel, you learn about merchandising or whatever. You speak to with people that are actually making the products. And then with so many more, because then you need to get that, understand the, the in a nutshell, what's behind sizing, which is data. It's,
Mm.
spoiler, it's all data, and then how to bring it into the the e-commerce stack in our case, which is why I was in operations and I was dealing with all of that, and then how to basically present it to consumers. So it became a communication thing, but that basically gave me the ability then to speak with more people in marketing, more people in, again, product creation. And then in the digital ecosystem, you just approach the experience end to end because you understand that it's not just one piece of the puzzle that would be like a size guide. You actually need to start presenting the attributes of the product somewhere else upstream. And so you start working across the funnel, you're horizontal, you get to speak to literally everybody. You start working, well, I've done it before with globalization, but it's a different dimension of dealing with engineering, product, with design. You just try to bring people into this journey of this is the problem. How do we do
Yes,
this?
it's the full life cycle, right? It's like from
Yes.
design to manufacturing to working out the sizing and then communicating it in a way
Yeah.
that people will actually select the right size.
Yeah, and then the other fascinating thing is that it doesn't stop pre-purchase, it goes into the post-purchase. And then you start working with the understanding that there's obviously a return side of things. And so you start diving into that. So you're adjacent to so many other teams, and that gives you such a view of the product life cycle itself. It's like, okay, you created it, you conceptualized, you created the product, now you're selling it, and then it may come back. And so I was like, okay, what's the loop? And in all of that, there's a ton of data, and some data that you gather here because you need to, at the beginning, upstream, and you need to transform, and then you communicate that to consumers. The consumer is like ingesting it in many different ways. That's also when we were experimenting with technology like the one you provide, and just saying, okay, can we use scanning? Can we use this? Can we use avatars? Can we use whatever we can? So we came up like, okay, let's try to figure something out. But then the product comes back, and then you figure, oh, there's so much data in the returns that can be used. And speaking of machine learning, AI, and all the stuff, then you start having so many data sets and models, and you start tinkering with how can I compile them or like get signals that reinforce one another. And then, I mean, it's fascinating because on one side, you're trying to resolve a problem that you probably have experienced yourself, and then there is the part of actually tinkering and working with things that are what the bread and butter of e-commerce sites, but at the same time staying on the edge of what's next and all these new technologies that are coming in. How can you use them again to serve the consumer, and again the state of can I leapfrog what is the presentation of today and get into the tomorrow and next. And in that, speaking of next and NXT, which is one of the innovation teams in Nike, then you get to start working with them. And it's just, I mean, honestly, it's been one of the best experiences of my life. I've had enormous luck with the people I've worked with, and in general, the subject, because it's such a problem, it's not solved. so it's still there. And you go like, okay, what can you do? And it's just fascinating. It just opens so many door and so many inspiring conversations with many people. So that's been how I found myself there. I was basically thrown at it, and I thought I was dealing with the Spice Girls, and it wasn't. Like that. Like, okay.
Do you remember what the Spice Girls were at the time? Like what you thought the problems were?
Well, I remember 4 of the 5 problems, and I don't know if the fifth is because it was so easy that I solved it, or it was impossible, and I can't even I removed it, I wiped it out of my memory. But I do remember 2 were about footwear, unisex, and some duplicative sizes out in the marketplace. And if you look at size charts in Nike, you can see that there are some sizes in the UK system in particular, or the CM, which is the one used in Japan and Taiwan and Mexico, that basically have repeating sizes, and you go like, that must be a mistake. So that cannot be right. It's out there, so I'm not disclosing anything. It's just like that there's yes. And then the other one was unisex, because this thing about unisex, I think, is just in apparel, in footwear, and across all brands is puzzling, and there's many questions about it and what it means. Then there was one about bra sizing, and bra sizing, especially when you use the bend and cup, which is the one that has 32B, C, D, blah, blah, blah. That one was one of the size, the issues. And then the other one was numeric sizing for bottoms. So size 32, 34, 36, whatever, and the scale, and how it translated with sizing in Europe specifically, because again, many countries may have different sizing. And so it was just about conversions and translations of sizes. In some cases, it was easy because you would say, oh, they don't know what it is. But if you have like a 32 means this other thing in Italy, then you kind of put that in a size chart and it becomes a little bit clearer. And others instead were like, how is this possible? And wait, how long has this been going on? So, but it's fascinating. Again, I think I met so many people just dealing with some of these problems. And there was one person at one point who had been at Nike for over 30 years. And he was saying, oh, somebody brought it up many, many years ago. And forwarded me an email. And the email came, and the font used in the email was, I think, Courier or something like that. Like, it was so old that even the font was like, it was like, this is like a relic from an ancient time. Somebody raised their hand and said, there's a problem here. And I was like, oh, and now I am dealing with it. It was comical in some cases, in others was, but I think in general it was just amazing. Yeah. Kept finding new things. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's such a one of the things we realized is like sizing. When we started solving sizing, we just thought, oh yeah, we'll create this scanning tool. We'll get the measurements of your feet, and retailers know how brands will know how their shoes fit. We'll just take the measurements and we'll just size it to the size charts that the brands have, and problem solved. There you go. So also naively, we jumped into this project, and then you get in there and you're like, oh, okay. Shoes fit differently. Brands don't know why they fit differently. You have to start working this out. Even if you nail all the sizing and people scan their foot, it's like, okay, not everybody scans their foot. So now what do you do for the people that don't scan their foot? How do you deliver sizing to them? And there's size charts. How do you make size charts accurate? Then there's the return. It's such a multifaceted problem. But yeah, I guess had we known, would we have started? I don't know. And perhaps the same with you. Had you known how difficult the problem would be, yeah, I think it takes some sort of naivety to start.
100%. And the funniest bit was that I was meeting with footwear engineers, and I would say some of the best people, one I've met, and two like experts in their fields. And basically they were looking at me and they were like, Sarah, typically people run away from sizing and you are just diving into it and sticking to it. They were like, that's remarkable. But it was fun because everybody was just saying, you really want to keep going with this? And I was like, yes, it's not solved. So I had like this passion. Now, in terms of, I think you can unpack sizing in so many ways. There were also many philosophical conversations about what was size, what was fit. So they were like, oh, there's a part that is science, there's a part that is more art. There's a lot of perception. There's a lot of even cultural norms that come in. There's so many studies, including stuff that Nike researched, that show that basically there's a good percentage of women that are actually sizing down in footwear. Men that are sizing up, like compared to what their sizing should be. And that is potentially given by norms or cultural norms or perception that women should be wearing smaller.
Which changes depending on geography, because we noticed we did this thing with Lacoste where we worked out how their shoes fit. And then in Paris, the people that were testing it we weren't sizing for them properly. I'm like, what's going on? And then realized, in Paris, it's like women should have petite shoes, and so they're sizing down.
Yeah, 100%. And then you also see behaviors again, of speaking of geographical differences of how consumers shop, what type of information consumers want. Like in Japan and in South Korea, if you could provide them with the garment measurements, they would know one how to use it, and actually they expect it. And while if you give that amount of information to consumer in the US or in Europe, they may be overwhelmed by it. So they want some of it but not all of it, and it's just fascinating how everything works. And then speaking of returns and how culturally is accepted or not accepted, country like Germany is like they have a habit of high returns because of how they culturally they were buying things through like magazines, post markets, something like that, and then they basically established as a marketplace a way of returning products that is so simple. But then many global corporations come in and sell the products, and then they see very, very high percentages of returns, and they're like overwhelmed by, oh, what's going on? And in part it's because of the payment methods. And it's like you could buy 10 things, but you only keep one. You are actually being charged for the one you keep, not for the others. So all the other things return, while in Japan they don't return as much. And so they would rather keep it and then maybe find some other outlets to sell the product or reselling and stuff like that. So each marketplace will present its own unique approach and also its specific requests for help, let's say, navigating sizing. And then going back with the about consistency and how you feel like, okay, I have your biometrics now, and now what about the product? And well, if you want, I can illustrate you something that is mind-boggling, or that in general, it's like something that I was like, we need to educate consumers, and some brands are doing it in different ways and better than others. But that was like one element of, oh wow, this is incredible. So
Let's go.
So I have T-shirts to show, and they are from different brands. Hold there. Hold
Awesome.
tight. So we have a T-shirt from Prana. This is, let me step back so you see it. So this is a standard small. This one is from Nike from several years ago. This is another standard small. And then I have this from the North Face, standard small. If I quickly put them one above the other, we will see that they kind of look the same or kind of size the same. Some length variation might happen. Probably need to put but here you go. So there are some differences in shoulder, although they're minimal. And then it's like length of the t-shirt. But
Oh, wow.
they are like, these ones, maybe because of how I'm hanging them, they're actually fairly close to one another, but there are differences when you wear them. And these are all standard fits. So you go and you say, okay, look at this, and this is kind of what you would expect a small, let's say, to be wearing. Here I have a loose fit. So standard, now loose fit, you theoretically add just a little bit of fabric. This is a Jordan women's extra small t-shirt, loose fit.
Okay.
Let me put again this standard from Nike so that I can compare. I have so many. So this is how it becomes like the difference between the two. Standard.
Wow.
So what came up is this one actually isn't loose fit. It says loose fit, but it's more in the oversized bucket. So, and you will say, what are you talking about? So essentially what happens is you don't have just one cut. You have many cuts, many fits. And at Nike at least there were like 5. So you have the tight fit, the slim fit, the standard, loose, and oversized. And every time they add or remove a little bit of fabric. But then depending on the silhouette, depending on the material, depending on a number of other factors, including manufacturing tolerances or whatever, the difference might be pretty significant. So again, going back to the fact that you may know the biometric of the individual, and you may even say, give me a preference. Do you want a standard or loose fit or whatever? And they may say loose, and then you send them that t-shirt. That t-shirt is way too big, and consider that that is an extra. So now, that is where shopping online in particular, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on photography because you need to show the body. And something that I remember the conversations with the studio that was taking the picture was, let's make sure that we don't pin the products. Because sometimes, as you add, especially the oversized and loose fit trend came by, it was like, we need to show how big it is. Otherwise, there is a chance people will return it, which is de facto what was starting to happen. So again, you have that moment where you realize, I have your data, but it's the product that has so many variables, and I need to understand the product and then try to find a way of simplifying all of it, and there's a lot in there, and kind of present it to you in the limited space that is given to us, and so that you understand what you're buying, and you don't have a negative experience in having to return the product, which is something you don't want to do and deal with, and it's something that costs a lot to the company as well. So it was fascinating. The same happens with footwear, in a different way, but essentially we found the upper material, the tooling that is used. There's so many things that happen just with the product itself that then change the fit. And even if when you have the same style, I was sometimes doing this, the luxury of going to the company store and having a whole fleet of new styles coming out with slightly different uppers and basically trying them on. And the athletes in the store were looking at me like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm just validating. I work in size of it. And they were like, well, whatever. And so, and with that, essentially was like noticing the slight differences where one felt a little bit tighter than the other one. The other one was kind of looser and stuff. And again, understanding that about the product, I think is really a big hurdle that everybody faces in the industry, and then communicating that clearly to consumers. It's all about the expectation that you set, and yeah, so that is in a nutshell the problem in itself. But it's a fascinating one to solve, and with the new technologies that are coming up, I think there's renewed kind of hope and around, okay, now how can AI be included in here, and what can it do, and there's potential for, I think, a new take on sizing and fit solutions. Technology has gotten better. Scanning, it's more accurate now, even through the phone, because a lot of stuff is also the dependency that you have on the device. And if the device is not designed to be accurate by the millimeter, for example, then it's like, what can you do? And so there's many elements of this that I think are going to be refreshed in the near future. Yeah, so
Yeah, for sure. I think about, a few sizing companies. I mean, there was probably other ones, but a few of the ones that are still around started in 2012. StrutFit started in 2016, which was just about when deep learning was starting to be used by Facebook and Tesla. And that method of processing, and that's really what enabled the scanning to happen. Because before that, you'd have to use computer vision. It's very computationally expensive, also very difficult to get right. And then all of a sudden, all you needed was a lot of data of feet, and you would label them, and the machine would just learn to identify a foot, and then you don't have to come up with algorithms to identify the foot. And now we're getting into, it's like, cool, we work with this one retailer which uses the same last in all their products, but their products still fit differently. And so we're working with the fit team. I'm like, what's up with that? Like, what are the attributes you think are important here? And the upper comes into it. I mean, if lots of different things come into it, but we're working now with the upper and the lining to see how that affects size and fit. And it's too difficult for a human to look at, 10,000 sales, each with different linings and uppers and foot measurements and whether they were kept or returned, and reverse engineer, if I have a new shoe coming out with the same product and the same lining and same upper, what does that mean? It's too hard for a human to do that. But with the advent of AI now getting to a point where it's like actually it can just work it out. You just give it enough data, it'll
Yeah.
be able to work it out and actually be able to size it appropriately for your footwear. So I think, and we're only just starting to do this. Like we just did this with one of our brands earlier this year, and now we're starting to do it with more brands. And I think, like having been in the space for ages, like you said, sizing isn't solved yet, and I would agree with that. But I think we're starting to see now. We had a hypothesis many years ago, and a lot of the things are aligning, and we're starting to actually see. Or say, actually, we can. I think we can actually solve sizing because it's such a multifaceted and massive problem. But yeah, it looks promising now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The other element of this whole conversation that I think is often compounded together is that we say sizing or fit, but then at least in my experience, it became like what I call the separation of concerns. So at one point, I realized if we were to really solve fit and sizing, the majority of that has to involve product creation. So you again, it's the development of the products. It's getting clearer on what you mean when you want an oversized product, or really looking at the data, population data, understanding also is this too long, the legs just being like too long or the sleeves being too long. It's like how does that reflect the population or the data? What is the data telling us about literally bodies? So there's that, and there's a lot of standardization, a lot of things that need to be fixed in a sense or looked into by those who make physically the products. Then there's the aspect of manufacturing and tolerances and quality, and that is another element that comes into the equation that is complicated, and there's a lot of data that may not be even proprietary to the brands because it's with the factories. And so it's like, okay, again, speaking of, I need that data set, then you need that data set as well. But then there's the part of the just the again, going to the consumer, going to the returns, how you bring all of these things together. And what I was basically coming to a conclusion was, at least from my point of view and what I was asked to do, it went from let's go into technologies and basically figure it out through scanning, figure it out through other things. But the data portion was becoming like complicated, too complicated. So needed more years. And then it became like, what can we do just to reduce the returns? And so that was when there was a sort of line drawn, and I was like, if we need to focus just on the return side of things, we don't need all that data about the product. To be honest, what we need to do is understand the return side of things. And so it becomes like, what do I need to do is, on one side, fit, solve it, and solve it with product creation, standardization of everything that is making a product. And then there is the part of how do I communicate, which is the product itself, which is more of in your control if you're in e-commerce. And then it's like, but then the product comes back. And again, you can harvest that data. You can work with the post-purchase team to get a better experience, user experience, and reason codes. And then the reason codes, if you get smarter about what you're asking the consumer to indicate, then that will give you so much. And then you start looking at exchanges and you start compiling again a different set of data. And your problem is not anymore solving fit, but is more like, how do I tell a consumer something about that communication of the product that is informed by a different set of data? And this different set of data became the returns data. Again, it's not that everything else cannot be used, but it's just that you start having so much that you can put together. And the use of that returns was like, oh, I know that by default this product is always fitting big because that t-shirt I showed you was returning. And I was like, well, because it's too big, so tell them to size down. Or just let's make sure that the copy just says this is exaggerated, like this is very, very big. And you just can make some tweaks and changes that actually help reducing the return. But then again, speaking of how do you inform or create that infinite loop between this is the product data that comes from the marketplace as a return, give it back to product creation, they kind of inform whatever is their next brief or fresh update of refresh and update of the same style, and then they kind of, they produce something new and they give you different type of information that now is more because you've had the conversation and you can close the loop. But at the same time, again, on one side you have the fit, on the other one side you have like realistically just making sure that the machine that is selling the product is functioning well and the consumer gets all the right set of information so that they don't return, and when they do return you make that data useful to you as well, just to keep you in things. So I feel like in the future, because there's so much understanding of these elements, if you understand that one thing will serve one purpose, an example, personalization. I think personalization and size and fit at times are kind of coming together, because the idea is if you give me your biometric data, then I'll be telling you what size to wear in this. But there's a lot of personalization there that I don't think was necessarily clear. Like you were actually going for that and to fit when that was there's different ways or needs to solve that. So if you want a baseline of this is big or small, you can achieve that in a different way essentially. And at least that was my journey. And so then it gave me a different perspective on of understanding the problem, understanding the technology or the what you have in terms of tool set in your arsenal to be able to go after that. And basically you realize you have different ways of going after the problem. So at least that was my
That's 100% synonymous with our experience. Like we started, as I said, with just this foot scanning tool, which we became famous for. And then we're like, okay, that helps. You get to personalize. People who don't know what their foot size is, they can scan their foot, and maybe 50 to 20% of your, depending on the type of retailer you are, the type of shoes whether you're selling fashion or performance, there's a different propensity to use a tool. But at a maximum, 20% of your sales will scan their foot, and that's cool. You can affect 20% of your sales. What about the rest of them? And so we've expanded this tool set beyond just scanning your foot. Now there's fit tips, which I think is what you were getting at, like analyzing the returns and then having an architecture to automatically work out which products fit differently and tell the customer. Because what we noticed, and it'd be interesting to see if you noticed this as well, like the return rate for returning customers, so people who'd already purchased the brand's product before, was almost the same as people purchasing product for the first time. And we're like, how does that make it like this person should know their size now because they've purchased with the brand before, but because of the inconsistencies between products, they were just returning at the same rate.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't remember the percentages. Maybe I should, but I don't recall that. I just know that there's an interesting fact of what you said about the consumer then learning something about themselves. So what I feel like the scanning in particular, but measurements in general help you is educating the consumer. Oh, this is who I am. And maybe that then helps them figure, oh, I'm wearing a shoe that is too small. I've been wearing small shoes for a long time. And by the way, that was my experience as well. For reasons I don't know, but as I moved from Europe to the US, I basically started wearing my actual size. And it happened just slightly before I joined Nike. So I don't know what happened and changed. I guess in Europe, I was wearing more shoes that were like classic shoes and athletic shoes. And I was basically, they have very different constructions for obvious reasons. And I was always trying and going to buy the same size, but the size in athletic was too small for me. And so then as I moved to the US, just probably went to store, bought one. I was like, this is more comfy. And I started giving myself room. When I scanned finally my feet at Nike, it basically clarified, one, I know what my feet are in terms of length or how narrow they are versus regular, whatever, the width. But I also know that I am definitely a 7.5 in US sizing. Some of the shoes I have from the past are like a 7, or like, why was this like squeezing myself in there. So I think it's not uncommon to hear people say, I didn't know I was that size, and that is already great for the consumer. But then to your point, you go and buy a different product and you think like now you got it. And that is because in the percentages of people that use the sizing or the fit tips or things like that, you see that there is, well, there's a reduced percentage, obviously. The majority of people just look at the image and then see if their size is available, check the colors, and buy. And they buy based on what they think they know about themselves, which is I'm a size small, or I can wear extra small in tops, or something like that, or I'm a size 7.5. Now, because I've been working in size and fit, I know how the product can easily change on you in the same brand, but also especially even more so as you shop across brands. And so I do give a check into the size guide. If it's footwear, I hope that they have the foot length millimeters, because then that will give me, but again, that is the one thing I know about myself. Then in apparel, I don't know my measurements, to be honest. I'm like, no, I think I've developed a keen eye on understanding how the product sits or fits the model I'm looking at, and then looking at some elements of it. I do check the fit intent, whether it's called fit intent or whatever it is. I think when someone tells you it's loose or oversized, they're giving you an indication this is going to be big. But yeah, I feel like in general, there's elements that are continuously evolving, and eventually, yeah, putting them together is gonna improve. And then I feel also there's elements of uh, maybe I don't know if I shared this before, but the 3D assets, the digital twins, the avatars. I think it's not just create an avatar and dress your avatar and now you have it. It's more like making smart use of some of these technologies, or the one are used in product creation. Because now the brands and more brands are basically fitting these virtual avatars with across the size, because I don't know how many out there know the basically the brands have a base size. So women's small becomes the size they actually build first, or the only one that they actually build. So they actually take a physical model, a person, and they start stitching things on her. They get the samples, they adjust things, they basically build that. And then medium, extra small, large, extra large are basically this addition or removal of fabric. And then it goes into execution at some point, and into production, essentially. I have wondered, and I don't have an answer to this, is my question has been, has there been ever anyone who's worn a size extra large of that specific style before it hit the market? And oftentimes the answer is no. It's the first customer who bought that extra large that is basically the first person who's trying it on. And now with avatars, or at least that was a possibility. And now with avatars, they basically create the 3D garment, and then they put it on the avatar. They see also the stretchiness of the material. They see all of that, and then they put it on the different bodies. And it's no longer just a small that is one form factor or body form. Now they have different shapes. So they understand also a better understanding, I think, through technology and data of what is a human body in a size small, and how different shapes, and it's just not the same height and weight, may lead to different body distribution, a mass distribution. And that means that you need to create, again, every garment in a different way. But now you have 3D that can help, and avatars that can help. And so you virtually try them on, and then you have a better path to accuracy, or expect at least understanding what you're building, or creating an expectation. Then you can validate and retest. But I think those are some of the evolutions in technology that is used in product creation that the consumer may not be seeing, but is actually serving them. Now, my fascination with all of that was that I've seen Arc'teryx actually making a great execution of avatars, and illustrating in their size guides how this human avatar essentially had like a transparency of the product, so you would see what a loose fit was going to be against the body. And I think those are just using these new technologies or new ways of displaying a product in a different fashion, and then 3D assets that can explain to you a fabric. So I feel like there's a lot of things that may happen. I've also seen immersive experiences where you, instead of having the usual UX of that any I would say any website presents when you're buying online, they basically walk you into the store, and they give you different things. So it's a different take on just the shopping experience. But I think there's a possibility that in the future we will see photography and maybe more of these 3D assets that are going to reveal something about the product that is clearer that a picture cannot give you. So again, it's tinkering with all of this and leaving also a bit of creativity, innovation, trying to figure what can work, what doesn't work, what resonates with consumers, and then making it to use. And I feel like that is going to be potentially something that we're going to see more of in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't realize they were doing digital avatars for designing. I was certainly aware of like shoes. They'll design a 42. What is that, like a 9, and then grade the rest of them. They're like, yeah, it should go up by 6 millimeters between sizes and do that. But yeah, I didn't realize they were doing digital avatars for apparel, which is really interesting because we just released our apparel sizing solution where we're like height, weight, body shape, a few different questions about your body, and from that we can work out your measurements. But again, only useful if you can relate it back to the actual garment. So I think we'll have a fun time delving into apparel sizing.
Yep.
Certainly for brands which know how their sizing works, sweet. For other ones, I think we're going to have to apply the stuff we've learned in footwear and see how readily it translates into apparel. But another fun sizing challenge. How?
Go ahead. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening, but I think 3D and avatars and stuff definitely used in product creation. And then again, my thinking was I want to use them to show consumers what it is like. And maybe you can make it even fun. Speaking of customization, just customizing shoes so that you can create your own. I was seeing my niece and nephew just playing around because they could customize their soccer cleats, their football boots. And that was just a fun experience. And I was like, there's a part of it that is fun. And so I was like, well, maybe at some point someone will even make a size chart fun because it's like finding, like playing around with a body, changing the shape, making it more like you. There's always, a lot of things about maybe people don't want to see themselves. So who knows? I think it's just trying again and putting all these things together. And it's an evolution. And eventually, yes, we're going to crack the code.
Yeah, for sure. Meanwhile, I saw you post a post on LinkedIn about returns. It was, I think, for every $1 billion in sales, the average retailer incurs $145 million in returns.
Yeah.
And that's probably an aggregate number. I'm sure it's higher for online.
Yeah. So I took note before this, thankfully. So that is the National Retail Federation with Priest Retail. They just released a research that basically looks into total returns for 2023. And they were saying it's a total of 743 billion in merchandising. I think this is a US figure. I don't even know if it's global, to be honest. That was 14.5% of sales. Now, so what you said is right. For every 1 billion in sales, 145 million come back. But they had the number for online sales, which was a 17.6%, about 247 billion. So you see that percentage goes up. And then again, in the experience, it's also, there's some product classifications, merchandising classifications that are more problematic than others. There's like dresses and skirts and pants have higher returns in general. There's outerwear. In some cases, the pricing of the product has obviously an impact on it. The higher the cost to the consumer, the more likelihood there is that they will return. Not the more likelihood, but it's like if they're not satisfied with the quality of the product or the fit of the product, they're going to return it because they've spent more. Then there's other things that are fascinating. That research was also speaking of fraud and how much fraud impacts basically returns. And I think there was from Statista, I think last year I read something about on average 10% of returns are fraudulent. And by fraud, I mean there's people that are just high returning, they buy stuff, they put it on, they wear it, and then they return it. There's that, but then there's organized crime, there's credit card fraud. Like you purchase something, you get points on your credit card, then you return it. I don't know if the points are taken away. So for example, there's all these elements of things that come up, not things that I would necessarily look into, but things that would emerge as we were analyzing the data. We would see clearly when we had a reseller market event or dynamic. We some brands or some styles definitely are under greater pressure if you have a product that sells really well. Take you're like on StockX and you see a specific shoe reselling or having a lot of value and stuff. What happens is there's oftentimes bots involved in the purchase of the product, and then there's actors basically wanting to make a profit on the secondary market. If at some point that shoe doesn't sell that well on the secondary market, they return the product. So you would see again from the reason codes the percentages of too big, too small, not as expected. This is specific to Nike, but you would see how they were lining up, and you would go like, that is resellers. And 100% it was resellers. And I think, I mean, if you go on StockX and you see who is now trending and stuff, I bet in those companies now they can look at returns rate and they probably see something similar in terms of trends. So it's you get exposed to things through size and fit, like sustainability and what it means, the impact of sustainability and of this whole reverse logistic, and then how that translates into CO2 emission and what it means in terms of trees cut, because people were always trying to figure out how do I make it tangible or more understandable to an individual that doesn't know what CO2 emission is. It's like, yes, okay, what is that volume? I don't know. So you get exposed to all these things that are adjacent to, again, solving fit or trying to figure out how to tell the consumer this is too big or too small. And that is where you keep expanding the aperture and you see how it affects the industry at large. But thankfully, at least, especially because there's more attention to sustainability, then there is this emphasis on understanding also returns better. And then from there, again, you get a better understanding of the product itself. And if you can send that information back, you end up making better product. You end up making strides into how you present or how you create and then how you present. So I think it's every little element or silo starts speaking to one another, to your point, or starts understanding how they can influence things that seemingly are very far from them. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned return reasons and return codes.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of different retailers. Some don't ask at all, and we're like, you need to ask why they're returning it. And if for a fit reason, is it too big? Is it too small? Is it too narrow, too wide? Some randomize it so people don't just select the first option.
Yeah.
What were the best practices you found which were most effective in getting return reasons?
Absolutely. Get the return reasons. Have too big, too small to begin with. Never, if you have a drop down menu, they cannot be the first option on the list. Put something like not as expected, didn't like as the first option, because the one that goes into drop down first thing will get that. If you have one of the sizing related, it will basically ruin your data set because it will be the first choice. So you will not be able to trust your own data. And then if you can work on the UI, try experimenting with which UI works best. And like Amazon at one point I remember with wardrobe was basically you could buy as many things, they would send it over to you, you would try it on and send back. And they were lining the reason codes in separate buttons, and they had too big, too small, fit. So they had fit as a catch-all of I don't know, but it's not necessarily again a sizing, but it's something with the fit of the product. So it would kind of capture all these noisy thing. Many consumers in the past thought if I say it's too big, too small, or if it's a fit related problem, they will not refund me. Essentially, they will accept the return because there was that fear. Then I think all of the retailers kind of started accepting, but there is a change in how policies are going to be addressed just because it's becoming too big of a problem. And so definitely have a return, split the sizing returns into big and too small. And yeah, don't put them on top of the list. If you can, just have A/B testing, experiment on what is the best format, get a good analyst to look into that. Just get analytics behind it because that is the best. And to be honest, I had one person, but they were brilliant. And actually, we changed person because it wasn't even a full-time position, and so it kept changing. Just to tell you, like how much you can uncover just by having the sense of I feel urgency or curiosity to see what is in here. And it wasn't even a fully dedicated position, but it served the business so much. So that is definitely one. And then, I mean, if you want to go the extra lens, is like you will start seeing the return reasons. And again, too big, too small, not as expected, whatever it is. And then if you have the same for exchange, you can match the information that you have. So essentially, you will say, oh, this product is coming back because it's too big. Fine, it's too big. Now the exchange is showing you that people are sizing down by half a size, a full size, or in apparel, one size, two size, which would be okay. You have clearly a problem there. But yeah, you can start basically creating a model around that data set just on its own, and that will reduce your returns. I mean, I'm giving away so that is like it's really, I think there was an ingenuity into figuring out, oh, this works, and it happened over years that we got to that point. But you can clean up the data, you can remove again if you have some experiences that maybe are or products that are more prone into going into resellers or something like that, then you can engineer a way of managing them in a separate way. But you get a read of everything else. And the read of everything else, I know that many use reviews, for example, and I think reviews can be used paired with returns. The returns are just the volume of returns for any retailer is such that you have basically a gold mine of data you're sitting on. So harvest that. And then you will see that as you look at reviews, the reviews will give you the hint of it's actually the sleeves are too long, or it's too bulky here, or it's too tight here. Yeah, so there's many ways of using data, but the point is the consumer is already telling you what's wrong with the product, so you just have to listen to it, which is not a small thing, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not. It's definitely not a small thing. Like we work with a lot of. There's I think different levels of wanting to solve this problem. Like a retailer starting out, they may just use a sizing tool or a different sizing tool, and it's like you're helping the problem. It's maybe 50% like a marketing thing. You're like, oh, we have this cool tool, you can use it. Then we engage with other retailers where we're a complete sizing partner and we're actually looking at returns. We're understanding how their shoes fit. And it's like, cool, we can actually solve sizing for you and deliver, dynamic size charts, dynamic fit tips, have the sizing tool, have the in-store solution. And then there's really large companies, I think just Nike and Adidas, which have dedicated size and fit people to where they're like, okay, we're at such a volume now and it's such a problem that we need to solve this. I almost think, and we've seen some companies which are much smaller, but they've already realized that it's a challenge and it's worth solving now before they actually get to that size and scale. So I guess when do you think a company should start investigating sizing and having someone dedicated actually working on it? Because I think more companies could benefit from it.
I agree. I think, honestly, from the get go, but definitely it's about the returns. I mean, the reason is the returns are something tangible. It will hit your margins, so you can quantify that. In even in some
Awesome.
environments, one
Take
may
care.
say I'm selling so
Okay,
much
you
that
too.
I'm
Bye.
fine with
Bye
the
bye.
percentage. And when you look at the data before, like 14.5% doesn't seem to be that much, but there's a dollar amount attached to that. And then there is the reverse logistic. There's the cost of basically circulating the product back if you can. And so that is the thing that you need to worry about if you are a retailer. So maybe it starts with take care of your returns first. I mean, at least have that, because if you don't, it will start eating, like you will start feeling it at some point. And then for sizing, if you make, if that's your bread and butter, you probably have fit experts that are making the products. But if you have your own channel for selling the product, especially, you need to educate the people that sell the product. And what happened and what we found was, like, especially because we were developing technology in house to be able to look at size and fit more holistically, then that is when you need to invest, because essentially what you end up happening what ends up happening is you create a product, then you market it, and you create beautiful campaigns, then you put it on your website. And yes, you need to communicate that. And one could say, well, that is something that someone else, you don't need a dedicated person there. But it's understanding the strategy at large, and then again putting together all these things. It's an ecosystem. It's not just a one thing where you need to have a one person. So, and then also it's like if you have it at a decent time, like as you start maturing and start getting bigger, you will realize how these people tend the size and fit experts in on the essentially on the consumer side are the ones that help, again, create, connect the dots within the company. Because the thing that we found essentially was, for example, the return data and the fact that some products were just small. That data wasn't going back to product creation at all, or at least the engineers were not seeing it. And so they were like, wait, this is, they you get to understand that some dynamics and some teams work in silos and only look at what is they're tasked with, while someone in size and fit will be horizontal and then will start going across the enterprise and connect a lot more. So if simply you're making shoes or you're making apparel, you should have someone that helps you connect the dots within the organization. And that will be important because you will sell more, you will create a better connection with your consumers on the selling side, and then on the return side, it will again give you better understanding and reduce that problem on its own before it even stands. So i think I think that is where, let's say, when is, as soon as you possibly can, as soon as you start feeling like, okay, I have a return problem, definitely put people in there. Within returns, very often the thing that, and in part is one of the things that was happening to me, people will come and say, oh, it's size and fit, it's a size and fit problem, solve size and fit upstream because it's causing this thing over here. And so again, it becomes a need, it becomes something that at the end of the day you need and benefits you. So yeah, I
Awesome.
was
But I
by
mean,
unicorn, so that you know, someone else said that I was a unicorn. And I, to be honest, I know
yeah.
one retailer who has a lot of side big, like a multi-brand, that has a size and fit dedicated team. Otherwise, I'm like, yeah, I don't know who does it in other companies. And yeah, yeah, that's all I can
Yeah,
say.
you're definitely a unicorn. I mean, again, we've been in the space 8 years, working with lots of different retailers and brands, and yeah, the majority of them just don't know anything about it, which is fine. It's great for us because we're like, okay, well, we're a complete sizing partner.
Yeah.
We can help you work it out. But it does mean we're then connecting the dots between lots of different teams, and certainly it would, I think, make everyone's life easier if they had someone internally who understood that and could work directly with us to help
Yeah.
solve that problem.
I also feel like there's a part of the technology, like on the product side of things and digital product side in this case. So one other example is completely different. But in my globalization and localization experience, I remember at some point Netflix came around, and Netflix was creating this digital localization team inside in house. It was big in size. They were developing their own technology or systems and tools and things, and people were like in the industry, some were skeptical that it could last, or that they were like, it's just too big, and it's, I don't know, where is this going and stuff. Well, it actually helped them in their global expansion to a point that it gave them the competitive advantage with other platforms as either caught up or are close to catching up with their geographical presence. But they had to invest in localization and globalization in house as well, because what Netflix understood is like there's markets and there's content that is being created elsewhere. And in order to reach the scale that they needed and at the pace they wanted, they needed to invest more in that. And so that gave them an advantage. It's just one element of, you don't think of as a company that essentially creates content and movies and shows as a platform that is Netflix about globalization, but they had one of the best globalization organization in the industry. And I don't know that many people understand that. It's like they were very, very smart, and everybody liked the use of technology and the people, the subject matters that they brought in. They covered all the bases, and that is in part, I think, from looking at it from the outside, I was like, no wonder they're expanding so fast and so successfully, because they understood that is something that they need in order to expand and have a product that consumers can actually engage with and like. So it's, yeah, it's just
Sure.
another example.
It probably benefited us in the Western world as well, because then it's like, okay, they have a better understanding of the Spanish market or the Korean market. And so
Yeah.
they invest in things like Squid Games or Money Heist, which became global phenomenons, which,
Yeah.
if they had just the local focus, then they perhaps wouldn't have done those things.
Yeah, no, 100%. So it evolves and then becomes something else. But it's just, yeah, small little things, and maybe people don't think about, because they seem like you could have gone to a vendor. And now, don't get me wrong, not everybody has the resources to actually be able to build a size and fit team inside in the company, or have a person dedicated to that. So, which is good for, I mean, you, for example. And I no, I mean, it's true, but it's such a thing where if I had my own brand, I would definitely say, okay, I need to partner with you, but I definitely need to also understand more about this, because otherwise, I mean, there's so much about yourself in there. It's like the moment of, it's like measuring yourself. And then you go like,
Mm.
look at me, this, I didn't know this about me. And so I don't know, I feel like it's needed. It's just that not everybody can afford it or prioritizes it, and then it's a cycle, and at some point I think experiences will change and get to a point where maybe um, it will become more of a thing in more
Yeah.
organization.
And this podcast might play a role in doing that. We'll send it out, and certainly people listen to it from these brands, and they're like, okay, maybe it's not a priority, but we should prioritize it, and it pays it. Like, it doesn't happen immediately. Like, obviously, you start on the problem. It's a
Yeah.
big problem. It's going to take a while to solve it, but eventually, it pays for itself and then some, because you're just not getting the returns back. It's an actual. You can tie it to an actual business case.
Yes, that is definitely an easy math. Yeah, that is at least justifying one position to look at it should come from your returns. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I
Awesome.
Let's see
Well,
what happens in the future. Yeah.
yeah, let's see what happens. We'll help shape it. Thank you so much for joining us on the Stratford show, and being so generous with your knowledge. And I'm sure I've seen brands fumble with many aspects of things we've discussed today. And so if we can give them some shortcuts, then I think they'll be super stoked. So yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for sharing your knowledge. I had so many questions we didn't get through, but I think that we just were both so curious about this space, and it's such a multifaceted problem that we could, I'm sure, talk for hours on it. But yeah, this was super great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The StrutFit Show. I've been your host, Ang Nair. And if you enjoyed it, if you found some parts where you were like, this has added some value to my life, then please share it with a few other people that you think would also value this information or that snippet. And when they like it as much as you did, I'm sure they'll thank you. If you're interested in what we're doing at StrutFit, head to our website at www.strut.fit to learn more and get in touch with us. If you want to get in contact with me directly, you can reach me at ang@strut.fit. All right, that's all, folks. Till next time, take care.